If you're going to consider doing this, please listen to why we're doing it. The biggest concern is probably the structural integrity of this section. Welcome back to KM Builds. This is mine and Matt's 1986 Honda Acti. There's a Honda Fireblade motorbike engine in the back, bucket seats, all sorts of customized parts. But today's video, as the title and thumbnail suggests, we are taking the next step to make this a super clean looking K-Truck when it is finished. And to do that, we are going to be removing this ugly looking drip rail, guttering, any sort of weather strip, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure what the official name is for it, but essentially what this thing does, captures the water and just runs it down there rather than it going to the top of the door. For us, this is going to be a show car or show truck, so we're not going to be daily in it, so it's not really an issue for us of this getting that wet. But there are a few issues in removing it, and there are a few concerns you may have, but let me go through them just before we start. So the thing that makes this a little bit difficult and why we can't simply just cut it off and filler it, and that is because this is actually spot welded. As you can see there, there is technically two different pieces of material. So we've got this section here, that's one piece, and another section here, which is another piece. This is a very vague kind of description of it, but essentially this is the door shut here, so the door will sit in this section. So the panel on the inside comes out and loops up, which creates the runner for the water, and then the roof then comes round and kind of curves into that section there, and this is the spot weld that you can see here. But what that means then is that if we cut this off here, these two pieces of material are technically no longer attached, and we will end up with a gap in this section there. And that is why when we cut this strip off, what we're going to have to do is basically weld it all back shut. It can be a little bit difficult. This isn't probably the easiest project if you've taken on welding for the first time. I'm no professional welder. I've only been welding for a couple of months, but I managed to do the driver's side kind of just fine, taking our time. I'll go through all that later in the video, but that leads us on to the first concern that you may have. And these concerns are all valid because that could determine whether or not you take this advice and do it on your own K-Truck. This kind of railing is also on a lot of old Porsches and stuff, so you could probably take this and translate it onto some other older cars. If you're going to consider doing this, please listen to why we are doing it and the precautions we are taking to accommodate for this. The biggest concern is probably the structural integrity of this section. One, we aren't going to be daily in this truck, it's just going to be for shows, so the time on the road is going to be very limited. But if we do get an accident, we do have a precaution for that. For this truck, we do plan on putting a big full roll cage inside the truck, and it'll probably be tied into these pillars, so if we have any sort of accidents or anything down the line, this is the least of our problems anyway, because hopefully the roll cage will do its job. So let's get in some better kit ready for welding, and we can show you exactly how to remove this ugly looking rail off our K-Truck. So first thing we have to do in order to start any of this is whatever you do, do not cut off the whole rail in one go, as this could possibly warp the roof. Things could come detached and go out of shape. Looking at the other side, I can kind of tell that I can take a fairly large-ish section at a time, but what we want to do is basically take out one section at a time, breaking it up into lots of different sections, just tackling each piece one after. Probably as your first starter, I would probably make some smaller sections, probably only a couple of inches long, but as I've done the driver's side, I know I can take some larger sections and it won't really affect the material at all. But once we've marked it all out, what we're going to do then is cut off our first section. So as you can see, our first section of the weather strip is now removed. I have been cutting mine fairly close. If it's your first time, what I would probably do is, rather than cut really close to the joint or to the inside there, what I'd probably do is leave 3 or 4 mil, cut that off, and then what you can essentially do then is file it down as much as you want, just getting it to the perfect shape. Some of you with a keen eye would have also seen now that we do have an ever so slight gap between the top panel and the bottom panel, but you can also see is that they're not actually attached anymore. You can ever so slightly move it, and that is what we are going to do. We are going to tap the bottom panel closer and just to close the gap. But when we're doing this, you've got to bear in mind that by slightly tapping that, you're going to increase the gap between the door and the A-pillar. For us, we don't really plan on putting the doors back on the truck at the minute, or we may not put them on in general. So for us, the gap there is never going to exist again because the doors are not going back on, but that's nothing to say that we won't down the future. But you also have to consider for when these trucks were made and some of the old cars, the panel gaps just weren't really any good anyway. So by tapping this gap closed by about 1/2 mil, is that really going to make much of a difference to the gap on your truck or your car? But you need to make the decision if you're going to tap it closer or just try and weld it as it is. Tapping it closer makes it a little bit easier to weld as there's not as much of a gap to fill with the welder. So that's what we're going to do. So just to kind of show you what I did, all I've done so far is just put some little welds every so often, just tiny tack welds for now to make sure that everything is nice and solid and we don't want to warp the panel. What I can do now is fill the gaps with a bit more weld, just allowing everything to cool every now and then. We don't want to warp anything and add too much heat. Now that the spot welds are filed down, you can kind of just look at everything, make sure all your lines are nice and tidy before you fully weld it up. You don't really want to be welding everything fully shut and then realize that one section of it is not welded properly or anything, and then you're gonna have to cut it all back open to get it nice and tidy. So just doing this means that you can tack it all into place, check it all, double check it before you finally weld it back up. I probably would advise using a hand file to remove all of your welds. You'll see in a minute once I've welded it all up fully. There's a lot of welds to remove by hand. If you get a nice coarse file, it's not that difficult. It's just a little bit of elbow grease. But what that means is that you're not removing any unnecessary material from the pillar, because it's so easy with an angle grinder and a grinding disc to take away too much and the material becomes too thin. What I'm going to do now, weld this up fully. I'll show you what it looks like welded, and then we've just got to file it all back down nice and flush. So this is the first weld done. So the only thing to bear in mind on the trucks and maybe any old panels is, as you can see here, there is a bit more weld because you can see there now we've got two panels which join, so there is a bit of a gap. Same is going to have the whole problem here. There's two panels, so you're going to end up with kind of overlaps in the material, and especially when you get to the back section, there's probably 3 different pieces of material to bear in mind, so there's going to be a lot more to weld and a lot more gaps in them 3 sections. But as you can see, they're not amazing welds, but they do the job. Just slight tacks, really quick. The material is really thin on these trucks, so I have got to be very careful. But all we've got to do now is hand file these down nice and flush, and then we can move on to the next section. I'm not grinding the material down fully back to the metal. We're going to leave the base of the welds, and we're going to make up for the sort of bit of a gap there with the body work. I'll show you once it's done, but let's file this done and then we can show you kind of what that section will look like before you move on to the next. So just to show you one sort of finished product, I did use this little belt sander to get at the little welds on the inside there. You could get a file in there, but this thing doesn't take much material off, and that just allowed me to remove the inside of the welds on that panel. Looking at the top section there, as you can see, I have left ever so slightly, probably not even 1/2 mil of weld on the bottom there, as what we will end up doing is we'll end up body working that nice and flat in the end. But as you can see, The weld runs nicely up the edge there. There's plenty of material there to sort of close up the gap. So that is all we kind of need to do for that section, apart from body work, which will be later down the line. What I'm going to do now, move on to the next section. This section should be fairly straightforward as well. I haven't really got to show you much of the process across here. I'll probably just chuck a couple of time lapses. But what I will do is the two sections on the K-Truck which are a little bit more difficult are this corner section here and the back section here. This is the only section that you could probably use an angle grinder, as you can't really file flat there, so I've just gone very careful on the other side, but we'll cross that bridge in a minute. But let's just continue the work and we will show you the troubled parts when we get to them. So just to show you, now we've cut the top section, this is one of the areas you kind of have to look out for. As you can see there, we've got this panel here, that tucks underneath the top panel. So you can see that that is the middle and the top panel, and you've also got the inside panel. So really speaking, by here you have 3 layers of panels, so be careful. If you're going to tap the material up, don't tap it up too much, because then you'll end up with a big indent in this section. Ideally, if you can keep it in the shape of the window or of the top of the door as is and fill the weld in, then that's probably preferable. But yeah, this is probably the first section to keep an eye out for. Still fairly straightforward, but what I'd probably do is leave yourself more material on here and file it to flat so that you get a nice shape ready to weld. But yeah, let's crack on. So we're finally on the very last section of removing the guttering off the truck. It's always the last piece that you do, you encounter some problems. Unfortunately, we have found a little bit of rust, but hopefully I can cut a piece out and put it in. But let me show you, just obviously see past the hole of rust, as you may not have that, but I'll just show you how the panels are made up and what to look out for. So this panel also has 3 sections similar to the corner I just showed you. What we basically have is this pillar here, which is the very bottom layer of material which goes right around the back there. We also then have the pillar sort of material. This section here goes above, and that is the middle layer which goes all the way back to there, and then we have the roof, which is the very top layer. Should be relatively straightforward. All you've got to do is just weld the 3 layers together. Obviously, like you can see there, we have found a little bit of rust, but just gonna weld some of this up now, get this fixed, and I can show you the finished product. That is the last of removing the guttering or drip rail, or whatever you want to call it, done. The back is a little bit iffy, as in the bodywork wise. We're gonna have to do a lot of bodywork to this truck when it's done. The rest of the finish is going to be in the bodywork. So obviously, if you're going to be doing it, I imagine you're going to be doing some sort of bodywork anyway, as you can't remove this without having to repaint. So if I just show you some close-ups before I put some primer on, and then we can show you some before and afters and just how much better it looks. So this line here, we're going to fill this in with body filler. We want to get rid of all of the joins, so like this weld here doesn't really matter that much. Same for the top there, we're going to fill this in anyway. I have left a tiny bit of the weld just to give me some extra material to attach onto. All this is pretty perfect. This is pretty good as well. It's quite difficult to get rid of the step. As you can see there is a little bit of a step, but that is because there is an extra thickness of material, but this will all be smoothed off with the bodywork as well. The patches I had to put in don't look the prettiest, but again, these will have to be body fillered in. We don't know whether or not we're going to keep the roundness of like the roof, or if we're going to try and smooth all of this into one. We're not really sure yet. So if we do fill it all in, all of this will be filled shut anyway, and if we don't, we're going to just smooth this off and form this edge nice and tidy. But as you can see, the drip rail is gone, relatively straightforward to remove. What I'll do next, I'll chuck some primer on there for now, just to obviously stop it rusting. There is a lot of body work left to do. We're going to have to filler and all that stuff anyway, but it is done. A few tips would probably be just really take your time. For the first time, I take maybe 3 inches gaps just to get it right, and start at the bottom of the window for the truck. Obviously you want to have a little bit of experience welding. I wouldn't tackle this if it's your first project welding, as you're likely to blow holes in the panels. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to put some primer on. Hopefully you like the before and afters. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Go and drop a subscribe if you haven't already to see the rest of the project. This is how it looks, and we'll catch you in the next one.